Hi, everyone.
Hey,
Welcome. We'll get started shortly, just letting people in the waiting room, and we'll get going. If you don't have your microphone on mute, if you could do that for me.
yeah, I think your microphone is cutting.
People have their microphones on, and if you could mute those, that would be great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Great. Thanks so much. Wonderful. So we're going to go ahead and get started here, and we'll let people in as they come. So thanks for being here today. See a lot of friendly names and faces, and always wonderful to see everyone. I hope it's a nice day wherever you are and you're not being harmed by any weather or anything like that. So, um, yeah, thanks again for taking some time to be here today on your Sunday. Um, so today's class is going to be about the marriage of understanding between yourself, your instrument, and music. Now, relationships in general are such an integral part of our society, right? Life is all about making connections, about making an impact. These positive and impactful relationships are necessary for a functional and thriving society, whether that be, a romantic relationship, a relationship between a parent and a child, friends, a teacher and a student, even a boss and their employee, an artist with the public. All of these are relationships are really enrich our lives and our society. The further I get into my career, the more and more I'm reminded that um, forming these connections and these relationships with people are so much more important than perhaps the notoriety of the hall I might be playing in, or any major recognition of the success that I might achieve or something like that. What's really important to me is that I can be impactful through the relationships that I create, whether that be with my own students, whether it be with you in this class right now, whether it be with my audience in a concert hall. That's what's really important to me, rather than whatever connotation that society attaches on to the importance of the event. To me, the importance is really being in the moment and being there in the present with whom I'm interacting with. Now, as musicians, the better we are able to form a good relationship with our instrument, the better and easier time we will have to effectively communicate with this instrument and communicate the music. With better understanding comes efficiency, right, of effort, and that will leave us more time and energy to establish these more meaningful relationships as artists through concert stages, teaching, community engagement, and so on. So, a couple general topics that we'll talk about today. There's some words to think about in the context of relationships, and I think these are important no matter the kind of relationship you might be having, right? Um, Understanding, honesty, trust, reasonable expectations, forgiveness, generosity, gratitude, vulnerability, and responsibility. I think those are all qualities that come into play in a well functioning relationship. I'm sure there are others as well, but I think those are some that are very important. So, first, I want to talk about understanding. I think as players, we're often in search of um, the best instrument possible, It's kind of like if we're searching for a life partner, of course we all want to find the best one, right? And sometimes we find some not good ones before we find a good one, right? Same thing with instruments. But I think what's important that with whatever kind of instrument that we might have, we try to get to know it as best as possible. And there are a few different characteristics, right, in any kind of instrument that you might have that might distinguish it from another instrument. So on the flute, um, one of these primary factors is most likely going to be the head joint, right? So most all head joint cuts, I should say not most, all head joint cuts come in different shapes and sizes, right? Um, we need to understand from our own instrument what we are getting from it and then how we need to balance this out. Again, that's like in a relationship, right? If you have two parties in a relationship, they should work to balance each other so that it functions well, right? So on the flute, that variable of the head joint cut is going to, you know, uh, be different on every instrument, and we want to understand what it's giving us and what it might not be giving us, or how we need to balance that out. So, in general, if your head joint cut is more square, the more likely it's going to be responsive. It's going to respond quickly. However, it might not be quite as flexible because sharper surfaces react quicker, right? So it might respond really well in articulation. It might be really good for like soft notes or something like that. But maybe if you want to really expand the sound, you might be having a hard time, right? So that's something that you have to know. Okay, my instrument provides me these things, but I need to maybe work a little harder in another area to get what I want out of this other characteristic. Now, if you have an embouchure hole cut that is a little bit more oval in shape, a little rounder, typically it might be slightly less responsive than something square. However, it might be more flexible, that you can find more colors, more flexibility in this. And this is a generalization, but I think it's more often than not the case. So you have to know, okay, when I want really define that real responsive, clear sound, I need to look for the sharpest point of the blowing edge in order to make it respond. When I want the flexible sound or the round sound, I might want to think of, connecting more with the curvature of the head joint of the embouchure hole. So basically, it's kind of knowing how to drive the head joint in a way, so that you can really maximize what you can get out of that. I think more often than not, we use a flute because we like it. We know, oh, this feels good, this sounds good, right? I like this. But I think it's important to know why, and also not to fall in love at first sound with a flute. Sometimes you have to kind of try it out in different circumstances to know, again, how it's going to respond in all of those circumstances, not just immediately, the first time you give it a go. So, again, understanding what the instrument might be giving you and how you need to balance it out. Other factors might come into play, of course. The material, if it's a light wall or heavy wall, some people find that heavy wall is more resistant, so the use of your air, your resonance might be slightly different on a heavy wall instrument than it might be on a lighter wall, or a gold flute versus a silver flute, right? So just as there, I think, is no perfect person, there is no perfect flute or perfect head joint. So sometimes we have to be willing to accept, some of the deficiencies if we like the overall. I think it's too easy to kind of be on an endless elusive search for the perfect head joint or the perfect flute or something like that. I think you're always going to find something that perhaps you wish could be a little different or wish could be a little better. But again, just like with people, even if we really, 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 really like someone or love someone, there's probably going to be one or two things that sometimes get on our nerves or something like that. So it's absolutely going to be the same case with an instrument. Another thing that you want to understand with your own instrument, obviously, is um, the scale of the instrument. What are some of the tuning tendencies? Um, Flutes are a little better regulated across the board than piccolos, for example. Um, Piccolos have a little bit more variety in terms of, the measurement of the tone hole cuts or things like that. So the scale on the piccolo might be really different than on the flute, where flute is, pretty standard across the board. There are a few different types of scales. When I mean scale, I mean basically the the way the instrument is tuned in terms of like the measurements of the tone holes and the distance apart and that kind of thing. So we have a few different systems such as like Albert Cooper scale or William Bennett scale, those kinds of things. But so some notes might be slightly higher or lower, but it's pretty regulated across the board. But every flute, of course, will be a little different, and so it's important to know, like, okay, on my flute, my D natural in the middle octave is really sharp, but on my piccolo, it's actually really flat. So I have to, make sure that I know the difference. It's really annoying when that happens, when on your flute it does one thing and on the piccolo it wants to do the opposite things, because it's like you have to kind of switch the chip and remember that you're, not aiming in the same place. But it's important that we all know our instrument, and so we know what to expect, right? It's like, well, that's the personality of that D natural, so I gotta learn to live with that, and I need to learn to manage that too. So that's another way that we need to know our instruments really well. Other things might happen, like for whatever reason, maybe you love the sound of your pads on your flute, but they happen to like wear down, you know, relatively easily or something like that. Well, you got to know that, right? And you got to be prepared for that and accept it as part of liking your instrument. Like you like it, but it has this thing that's annoying about it, so you might have to care for it a little differently or get it serviced more often. So a lot of different variables that could come into play. We just need to, like I said, try to understand our instrument as best as possible. And you know what happens sometimes? You might spend years really, really trying to understand that instrument, and you might just realize it's just not for me. I really tried. So that might happen too, and that might be when it's time to look for something different. But I think you want to really give it your best effort and try to understand it as best as possible until you've kind of exhausted every option of understanding, and then you might say, okay, maybe it's time for a change. See what happens here. So I think those are some important things in terms of understanding your instrument. Now, I think with any good relationship, successful relationship, honesty is a really important quality, right? In fact, I think the best way to be positive is to be honest. And I think we have this kind of feeling like if we're honest, it means we just say whatever, like without care or something, like, oh, I'm just being honest. No, it doesn't mean that, but it just, you actually value it so much that you're willing to be honest about it to move forward in a good way, right? First of all, it's important to accept the fact that we are all fallible, that we will fail at some point, because failing means living. You cannot live without failing. We would not be able to really progress if we don't learn from our mistakes. So accepting that right from the get-go and forgiving yourself in advance. this idea of perfectionism is kind of funny because it's not really about doing something perfectly. It's actually about being afraid to do something because you're afraid you won't do it perfectly. So perfectionism is actually more about fear than it is about the result. So, I think forgiving yourself in advance for any difficulties that may arise, and know that it's all part of the process, is something that is really important. I think we kind of need to think of ourselves like scientists in a laboratory. They get it wrong actually most of the time. When they get that one major breakthrough, it's like really big deal, but they're getting it wrong all the time because that's actually how they're discovering. And sometimes they might be in the process of trying to discover one thing and they might discover something else, so we have to be willing to be wrong and actually realize that although that answer is maybe wrong for that specific moment, it might be right for another moment. So that's what I think we want to be aiming for in the practice room. We want to have a sense of curiosity and discovery, and then we always want to work not just to do, but to understand. So one thing that is really important is to be honest with yourself about what you can and cannot do. And it's okay to admit when you cannot do something, that's the first step in actually working toward accomplishing it. Or maybe it's just something in your life that you say, okay, I can't do this, and you know what, maybe I won't do it. Maybe it's not going to be something I really need in my life. Like for me, that's circular breathing. I don't do it. I can't do it. I don't do it. I won't do it. I don't want to do it. I don't have anything against it. It's just I don't need circular breathing in my life. I just don't. So, I let it go. I said, okay, I'm cool with not doing circular breathing. I don't think I'm a bad person. I don't have any moral struggles because, I decided I don't want to circular breathe. It's just, I can't be everything all the time, and I'm just not going to circular breathe, right? So, it's okay. You don't have to, if you can't do something, it doesn't mean you have to do everything. You can't be amazing at everything or an expert at everything. But, having an honest assessment of where we are in any given moment is super important for being able to progress. I think sometimes we might go into the practice room with unreasonable expectations or even just too many expectations, and we don't allow ourselves the room for discovery, right? So sometimes instead of saying, okay, today I'm gonna play, TNG number 4 at 172, really fast tempo or something like that, maybe ask yourself like, oh, I wonder what tempo I can, effectively play this exercise at. And maybe play it without the metronome first, and then maybe ask yourself, I wonder, can I figure out what tempo that is? Because I think having a good sense of, tempi is important as a musician. So then you might put your metronome on and go, okay, yeah, I'm not far off. Well, let's see if I can do it at this tempo, So you're more discovering what you can do rather than saying, okay, this is the be and all and end all tempo, and I have to play it that way. And when you don't do well, you start going, what's wrong with me, and all of this kind of judgmental stuff. So just being honest where you are, and if you can't do it, say, okay, well, I wanted to hold my long note for 17 seconds and I only got to 15. Well, let's see tomorrow if I can get to 16, something like that. Whatever it is, it's really, really, again, super important to recognize your own limitations, and we all have them, and you're going to be a lot more successful at what you do want to do if you recognize what your limitations are. And if you have too many limitations, right, that's not going to be good either. So you want to know how to get over those limitations. So super important just to be honest with yourself. I often hear, on social media, there's, obviously a lot of positive talk, and we absolutely want to be positive, but I hear things like, be kind in the practice room, and I don't think it's about being kind or unkind. Again, I think it just, you need to be honest, and Always be critically analytical, not judgmentally critical, in that sense. Again, back to that sense of understanding, I always ask my students, what's the difference between trying and doing? For me, trying is you don't understand how to do it and you just make an attempt, right? And then doing is executing your understanding of how it works. So that's what we ultimately are going for. Now, it's often said that musicians spend a lot of time alone in the practice room. And I think that this is a false statement, because unless you are playing your own music written by you that intends to be only for you, you are always with someone else, and that is the composer. So we aren't alone in the practice room. There's a lot of talk, about musicians with mental health, and that's an extremely important topic. But, it's said that musicians spend a lot of time in isolation. While physically that might be the case, I think if we really engage with music in a way that we are actually in the room with someone else, as the composer and the audience that we are going to be performing for, eventually sharing the music with, then we can feel less alone, So it's really important that we get to know our music on the deepest level possible. Another thing, I think, when we talk about languages, if someone asks you as a musician if you speak more than one language, you should always say yes. Because you do if you speak, English and then music, or you speak Spanish and music, or English, you speak music. It is a language. So we have to understand that language. Now, it could be a complex language because there's many different kinds of dialects and that kind of thing, right? But it is still a language. So I think if we think about music as that tool for communication, and we recognize again that we are not.
Nicole Esposito, 226.
If we recognize that. I was muted. Okay, I think we're good now. Sorry. Again, recognizing that we're not alone in the practice room, I think that it already will open our horizons and open our spirits as well. I think before we even, attempt to play our music on our instrument, we need to understand the music first. So just as we spend a lot of time with our instruments independently of the music, we should also sometimes spend time with music independently of the instrument, in my opinion. So now, when you do spend time with your instrument, alone, that might be practicing tone studies, vibrato, articulation, technique, everything that encompasses technique. What you're essentially doing is building a sense of trust between you and your instrument. You are, removing those limitations that might be there. You're creating a reliable technique. That's why we spend so many hours practicing, right? So that we are able to form this bond with our instrument, that we know when we do this is going to happen, right? The instrument is going to respond accordingly. So you're building that sense of trust again. That's really, really essential, because when you don't have that trust, it's kind of uncomfortable, right? It doesn't feel very good. So you want to make sure, especially if you're spending a lot of time at it, right? If you're putting a lot of time and effort into it, but you're not building this trusting relationship, then it can feel very discouraging. Again, just as with people, right? So you really want to make sure that you have a economy in your effort as well. and that you're doing things that are creating reliable and sustainable practices that you can trust for the future. Now, with the music itself, again, it seems it's out of balance to me if we spend, let's say, a few hours practicing, technique every day, alone away from the music, but we don't, study the score or, take advantage of that. So I think it's a good idea to sit with the music, even before playing it with the instrument, and try to get a sense, just like it's a person, because it is. It's coming from a person. A person wrote this music, so this music is a product of that person's experiences, of their thoughts, of their emotions, of their despairs, of their successes, and we get to witness that or be a part of that or engage with that and form a relationship with that as well. So maybe you might want to spend time with your piece, and first, before even testing it out, maybe just not even listening to that specific piece by that composer, but if the composer wrote several works, you can't always do this if it's a contemporary composer and there might not be recordings available or something. But if there are many recordings available, say you're playing a piece by, I don't know, Poulenc or something, not just listen to the flute sonata, but maybe even before you listen to the flute sonata, listen to his operas, and then his symphonies, and then his piano music, and then his other sonatas. And then you listen to the flute sonata last, and that might give you a completely different contextualization of the music itself. And you're not just listening to it through the lens of a flutist, thinking about, oh, that note is difficult or this note is difficult. You're more listening to the language of the composer and trying to form a better understanding of what compositional tools the composer might use to convey certain emotions or feelings. Now, in some cases, you might find a composer whose stylistic language changed so much throughout the course of their lifetime. Hidden Myth is a good example of that. For example, if you listen to some of his, I think he wrote 26 or 28 sonatas, and if you listen to some earlier work compared to later works, they're so different from each other, and that might inform what you're doing. Obviously, it's a good idea to get as much context about the composer or the work, especially if a work, for example, has it's a dedication. Maybe it's dedicated to someone. Let's look that up and see who that might be. Was it just, maybe you're not going to find exactly this information, but you're going to find some information. That's the beauty of the internet. It literally contains every bit of information any human being ever wanted to know. So even if it's a sentence or two, you're going to know more than you did before, right? So taking advantage of that resource is very important. But, what was the relationship of that person to the composer? Maybe you can find out that information. Did that inform how they wrote the piece? What are some of the compositional devices that they typically use, and or to represent some of the things that might have happened in their own lives? Maybe they had a very tumultuous life story, and that could inform their compositional style as well. So giving yourself as much information and context, although it might seem like a little bit of work, it's just like legwork at the front that's going to make your job and your time and your time in the practice room and discovery operation a lot more interesting and fulfilling and easier, frankly, because it's going to maybe remove some guesswork. I also think it's important, as we're trying to get to know the music better, to ask questions, like even like, you know, skeptical questions like, are you hiding something? Maybe there's a hidden melody in the phrase or something like that, and or a structure or a very basic structure in something that looks very complicated, but maybe you're kind of getting caught up in that and you're missing something a little bit more basic in the line that's a lot easier to grab onto, right? Maybe you want to figure out like what are the behavioral patterns, right? Well, those are just again certain patterns that come up again in the music, that, you know, oh, every time I see this, it's just this, it's just a whole tone scale or something like that, or it's pentatonic scale or whatever. Maybe you want to say, I wonder why he wrote it in minor. What would it sound like if I played it in major key? You know, I think so often we are so focused on, you know, getting right what's on the page that we have to think like probably those notes are not the first notes that the composer wrote, right? They probably made a lot of different sketches. I'm sure they didn't like just write everything perfectly from their head and then it was done. I mean, there might be some people like that, but unless you're a very, very special mind, probably, you know, you might have had some different thoughts or you weren't quite sure which direction to go in. So therefore, you might do the same. Oh, I wonder what happened if, you know, this resolves to a seventh chord. What if it resolved to this chord or something like that? Just to see how that would change the feeling. Again, because when you understand sometimes what it isn't, it's a lot easier to understand what it is. You can do that with meter. You know, you can change the meter. Oh, he wrote this in, you know, 6/8. Well, how would it sound in 3/4 or in 2/4 or something like that, and shift the meter around. And then you're like, wow, I'm really not thinking about the meter in terms of the expression. I'm just counting, you know, I'm not really demonstrating the inflection of the meter, you know. You learn from that, you know, because when you have to do it in a different way, again, sometimes it just highlights, you know, the possibilities that exist of, you know, tools that you can utilize or the composer utilized to express whatever message they are trying to convey. And if we have any questions, I love questions. So if we have any questions at any time, please go ahead and put them in the chat and I will answer your questions. And like I said, love questions. I'm always here to help you as best as I can. So I want to know your questions, any questions you might have for me. I think another important thing in the practice room is that willingness to be vulnerable. I think, and again, in human relationships, sometimes people that are a little guarded, you know, or don't want to open up or don't want to share too much, they sometimes can have trouble, right, in relationships because maybe the other person wants them to be more open or receptive, and if they're not able to do so, it can create some misunderstandings, some communication problems. So in the practice room, we really have to be willing to open up as much as we can of ourselves and also to be open-minded, you know. Maybe we think we got all the right answers, but again, if we're not curious about other options or possibilities, then we're also not very open-minded. And being vulnerable to make that mistake, it's okay to make mistakes because you're going to learn from them, you know, not feeling like you have to be perfect at all times, you know. I always tell my students, like, people should walk by your practice rooms and they should go like, ew, what's going on in there? You know, because it shouldn't sound beautiful all the time. Because if it just sounds like your most beautiful playing all the time, then, you know, you're not really practicing, you're just playing. You know, you gotta be willing to make funky noises and figure out, hey, well, that actually could work in an instance, right? I could use that somewhere. So, you know, that ability to be curious, open, and vulnerable is super important. Also with your emotions, you know, sharing those through your playing. I think that goes also into generosity. You know, I think there's, it's very easy to get self-centered. Again, especially if we're thinking of ourselves alone in that practice room, we're thinking of everything in the context of our own mind, right? And sometimes I'm getting a question about anxiety, but I think that can alleviate some anxiety when we're not always just focused on ourselves and our own kind of context of things. And I think if we have a spirit of generosity in terms of what we're able to offer someone else through the product of our labor in that practice room, we can have a better time of it. I think that's what's difficult about being a musician, is that you have to give 100% and lose 100% of yourself at the same time, you know, because you need to be strong and committed and focused for the music, but you don't want your ego to be in front of the music, right? So finding that balance it can be challenging. But I think we have to have that spirit of, you know, generosity, and that the experience is beyond us, just us and alone. No one goes to a concert, I would say, to like watch someone play an instrument, right? They're sharing in the experience. So you know, you want to be generous in that moment and what you're able to give, and that goes in any kind of relationship, of course, teacher student, so on and so forth. Okay, just looking at the questions. What do you think when one thinks frequently, I'm not good enough? That's a great question. Now, for whatever reason, you know, I've experienced a lot of different things in my life and a lot of different, you know, types of hard moments or hardships, but one thing that I always had, I don't know if it was instilled in me by my parents or it was just part of the fabric of who I am, is that I always had a belief in myself. Doesn't mean that I always thought I was perfect or wonderful. I always had the belief that I would figure it out, you know? And one thing that I think in the younger years, I certainly worried about what other people might think, or I wanted people to think that I was good or something like that. The older I get, I'm really not concerned about that anymore. And that, of course, vulnerability of really allowing myself to be who I am 100% as much as I possibly can. And even if a lot of people might not like it, allows me to be actually much more effective at what I do. So for me, the only way to be good is to be authentic. So I think if you're being yourself and you're recognizing in yourself, again, you have a relationship with yourself too, you know, understanding who you are, what you value, being generous, being grateful for the opportunity to be able to do this. I think if you're as sincere as you possibly can be, then you can only be the best, you know, in terms of what it means to be your own best person. So if we're constantly measuring up in terms to what other people's expectations might be, I think we're always going to feel like we fall a little bit short, right? That's, you know, because it's difficult to meet other people's expectations all of the time, right? That's why in relationships, again, if you have a partner that has like really unreasonable expectations of you, it can be exhausting because you feel like you're never meeting those expectations, no matter if you're doing really nice things all the time. The problem is maybe not with you, it's with the person that's having those unreasonable expectations. So we have to understand that, again, we have to have those reasonable expectations over ourselves, and we have to not aim to be good as compared to so-and-so or, you know, so-and-so flutist. You know, you just have to be the best self that you can be, because the world needs you. The world needs all kinds of different people. So there are things that I could do a lot better on the flute, and I know there are flute players that can do it a lot better than me, and I don't really think about that stuff because I'm not trying to be that. I'm trying to be the person that I know that I am and what I can uniquely offer the world. Okay, a couple other questions. What is my take on musical interpretation? It's a great question. So I think, I talked about it already a little bit in terms of, context. That's very important. Understanding the composer's kind of idiomatic language, compositional tools that they often use. Why composers use certain chords, intervals, meters, those kinds of things. All of those things have a meaning, If for example, you have a passage and it changes meter a lot, the composer's not testing your ability to count. That's not what's happening. It's a change of feeling, right? So when we're talking about interpretation in the spoken language sense, if you're in the airport and they say, "Oh, I need an interpreter over here at station 92," they don't want a kind of sort of version of what the person is saying, right? They want it as close as possible translation, right, of what the person is saying. So now it's impossible to know exactly what the composer meant, I was with an interview with a pretty famous, well-known composer, and I thought I had all these, I had really understood what he was going for and all these deeper meanings, and we were asking questions about the piece, and he was like, "No, it's just all about the notes." Which was a little sad, but also a little funny that, we really, really thought we had it all figured out, and probably we seemed to know the piece, his own piece, better than he did, and oftentimes that could be the case, So you're going to get various levels also from composers. They're just like performers. You're going to get various levels of commitment in the music or meaning, those kinds of things. So, but in general, even if I don't particularly like a piece of music, I'm still going to try to understand it. In fact, if I don't like it, I'm probably going to try to understand it even more, because I don't want it to have that power over me. I don't want to feel like I don't get this, and it's, I'm having a hard time interacting with it. So I'm going to take on that, responsibility on my side of getting to know the piece even better, to see if maybe I can do anything to change my own opinion about it. And if not, that's okay. I don't need to play in the sandbox forever with that piece of music, but I need to at this particular moment in time, so I'm going to try to understand it as best as possible. So I think what we don't want to do is sort of learn the notes, like woodshed the notes, and then see what we want to do with it later on. So it's kind of learning the music like it's not a living thing, which it is, because it comes from a living, breathing soul, but see the notation and think it's just kind of like dead puzzle pieces that we need to put together, and then we, color it with whatever colors we want later on, I think that is not the best way to go about it, Again, sometimes you might think you have a fantastic interpretation and it might be off the mark. That's okay. You can't get it right 1,000% of the time. But I think we have to give our best effort in that regard. Okay, another question. Thoughts for overcoming practice anxiety, especially worrying that those practicing around you might be thinking about you. Yeah, that's what I said. I already answered that a little bit. I mean, yeah, it's funny. I think if you have time to think about all of that stuff, that you're really not engaging with the music on a deeper level. Because if you're really thinking about, like I said, the composer, as you're in the room with that person, and as musicians, we're like time travelers, right? It's like, okay, I get to go back 2 centuries, or maybe it's just 2 weeks, if it's a contemporary piece, but maybe it's, from a few centuries ago. I get to go back 2 centuries, and I get to have a conversation with this person and figure out, like, what was going on at the time in the world that inspired them to create this piece of art. If you're really thinking about that stuff and really engaging with that, you don't even remember that somebody's next door to you, I think, so it's not that might not happen sometimes, and it's totally normal as human beings that we sometimes second guess ourselves or feel a little insecure. That happens to everybody, everybody. But I think that if you're giving yourself a much larger sense of purpose and continually, that stuff starts to become more in the background. It's not the main actor. So again, it's not about completely removing it, because that's just human nature sometimes to think those things. It's about making sure that you're balancing it out with more important stuff or more worthy stuff that you can engage with, and that's going to inspire you. Those are great questions. Thank you. Do we have any other questions that anybody wants to ask?
Yeah, so kind of on the I hope it's okay.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah, so kind of on the same note of practice anxiety, I guess how do you set your expectations in the practice room when you've got like a list of things? I tend to be someone who succumbs to practice anxiety when it comes to having to address absolutely everything, and so there's almost like I collapse when I'm trying to plan stuff. So how do you plan your practice? How do you set your expectations, and how do you overcome that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Again, I think you have to know yourself and know your circumstances. Like, what I tell you what I do might not work at all for you, right? So like I don't plan my practicing at all. I don't practice very much because I don't have time, but like it's usually like, okay, I've got 3 minutes now. I felt like my articulation was a little funky this week, so I'm gonna like make sure I kind of like find the gears and make sure I'm like I can do it, right? So my practicing is gonna look like a lot different than maybe yours or someone in school or something like that. So I think, but I know myself. Like, I know I'm a type of person, like, I'm a very high achiever. I'm also really, really capable of doing nothing a lot of the time. In fact, if I weren't such a high achiever, I'd probably call myself lazy. I think I just achieve it all really fast so I can get it out of the way so I have more time to do nothing. I mean, I'm partially joking and partially not, but I know that about myself. I know that I'll always get it done. I know that no matter what, even if it's like I stay up all that night or whatever I have to do, I'm a very whatever it takes kind of person. So I know that about me. I'm not going to worry about that because I've had enough experience also to know that it's going to happen no matter what. Like, I'm never going to, even if I didn't practice as much as I wanted to or whatever, or I don't have time, that the end result is going to be not bad because I'm in charge of it. I just know that about myself. Again, it doesn't mean I don't screw up sometimes or have bad days or whatever, but so I think that's paramount, is like, if you know that certain things are going to cause you more anxiety, don't put yourself in that situation, right? So I need to know that about myself too. Like, okay, I'm not going to function well if this happens, so I got to make sure that I stay on top of that, I think that's really important. Time management can be, I know for me, I don't do well, like following like a schedule, like a set schedule. Like, I know it's all going to get done, but I'm a little bit more sporadic when I do things. It's sort of like how when I clean the house, I might spend 5 minutes in my bedroom and then I'm in the kitchen the next minute, and then I think about something that I wanted to pick up in the living room, and that reminded me of the flowers that needed to be watered outside, and I it all gets done, but it's all over the place, but it gets done, and I know that it's going to happen. So I think it's a mistake sometimes to say, no, it must be like this, you must have a regimen, blah blah blah, because if that doesn't work for you, it's not going to work for you. That's the bottom line. So I think sometimes we have to try out different things, different methods. maybe you think something doesn't work for you, but you haven't really given it a try yet. It's just maybe not your go-to. So you might try out something, more methodical, maybe, like, practice calendar journal or something like that. Again, everybody's different. I know for me, what tends to work for the majority of people, I'm the opposite of everything. So it's like melatonin keeps me awake and NyQuil keeps me awake and, all that kind of stuff. I'm the opposite of everything. So, I know that I got to know that about myself. So that's, I think, the best advice I can tell you is just to be honest about like who you are, what works for you, and how, you process things, how you flow in that sense. And don't conform to like what everyone else may say is the best way. If it honestly just doesn't work for you, you're going to be a lot more successful if you find the system that does. And sometimes you just got to try a few out before you really know. And when we do try something out, I think it's really important to really commit to it, because that's the only way that you know if you like it or not, or if it works or not. So I hope that answers your question.
If there's not any more questions, I can keep going.
Sure, you can shoot. Go ahead.
So, I totally get rebound insomnia with melatonin too, so I'm on that with you. Yeah, so how do you manage distractions while you? Okay, so I just played in a master class the Iber concerto, and it was in a really 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 echoey hall, and I practiced with a lot of carpet around me and stuff like that, and I walked on stage and I did the whole thing, and it was so echoey, and I just the whole time was panicked about so much echo, and I listened to the recording and it was all fine, so I should have just focused on the practice. How do you manage this sort of distracting thoughts? I know this is kind of philosophical, but how do you manage these distracting thoughts that are like coming in when you're trying to execute what you've practiced in a different scenario?
It's a great question. Well, I always practice in a distracted state, actually. So, I never sit down and be like, oh, I'm going to practice now. Again, it's always like the TV's going, students are asking me questions, it's like all like, I'm very used to that. And I think that it's actually a mistake to try to shut out the world too much when we practice, because we don't perform in those circumstances. We have to try to assimilate. Sometimes we might need, for whatever reason, just a little time to get away, focus in that way. But sometimes I think when we're trying to focus, we don't really know what we're focusing on. It's more just like kind of shutting things out. So for me, focusing means to really be in the moment and accept whatever's happening in the moment. And that might be, okay, I'm in this acoustic, so I gotta calculate now. Because so much of we do is about like calculation, right? So this is happening right now, so that means I have to adjust this. Again, it's just like getting to know your instrument. Okay, it's giving me this. I have to calculate and know that I have to back off in this way or that way. So I do think it's important to practice in a variety of different acoustics. Now, sometimes we don't always get the chance, especially for outside of school. We're just kind of, we got to practice at home in our living rooms, but maybe you have different rooms in the house. Maybe your bathroom's really echoey. Usually the bathrooms are echoey, right? Go practice in there sometimes, and so that you know how to interact with that acoustic. Because again, you felt overpowered by it. So then you got distracted, right? Because it's like a person, right? When someone is like, their energy is too much, you're like, it's like overwhelming. So we need to know how to deal with that kind of acoustic, right? So we got to try to put ourselves in that. Same thing with dry acoustic. That can also, we're not getting any feedback. That's like, you go on a date and someone just doesn't like talk the whole time. It's like, okay, what's going on here?
That's perfectly said, because the problem was that it's you can't even adjust to what's happening if you're getting so much feedback that you're hearing what you did 2 seconds ago and you're trying to focus on what's going now. But then I don't know. That was really really well said. But a really dry room, it's like you don't get enough feedback almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we need to know how to interact with these spaces. We need to know immediately. Like, for example, if I find that the space in front of me is incredibly unfriendly, like acoustically, I try to focus on the space behind me, because the problem is when we're in front of, we feel negative feedback, we tend to push. And the more we push, we condense. So if I focus on the space behind me, even with my voice, I start to resonate much differently, right? So something like that. Or if it's really, really, like you said, echoey, or you're getting a lot of feedback, maybe trying to feel yourself as like the stability inside, because you're getting this feedback of like movement, right? But recognizing yourself as the stability against what you're feeling or what you're hearing, I think that can also be helpful. But you got to kind of know that, right? You got to know how to respond, right? Again, it's like a teacher with various students. I mean, I know that all my students bring out different parts of my personality, and one person's lesson might look completely different than another person's lesson, because I also need to know how to react to them so that they'll respond to me well too, like in that relationship sense, right? So everyone learns differently, everyone responds differently to different kinds of stimulation, whether it be oral, visual, that kind of thing. I need to know that as a teacher as well to best help my students. I think it's the same thing in a hall. We got to know, like, okay, this is a booming hall, I got to shorten my articulation or whatever. We need to know kind of immediately those things that we need to adjust, so that we don't, again, kind of succumb to feeling, overpowered or overwhelmed. Great. Did you have any other question, Tyler?
I'm always scared to just dominate the room, but no, I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. Does anyone else have any last minute questions? I just want to make sure I answered everybody. I think so. Yeah, but once again, I'm just going to reiterate that, you know, try to find a deeper meaning in what you do always. You never know, even if it's just one person that you're touching, you never know, like, what might seem small and insignificant in terms of being important, if it really makes an impact in even just one person's life, like, you're doing well, you're doing well. So I think focusing on that kind of thing. Brian, did you have a question?
Me?
Yeah.
No. I was
Okay.
just listening to about everything. I answered one question a lot earlier, but
Okay.
I like how you're talking about everything you just said.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that we can be a lot more impactful if we don't just kind of focus on ourselves. It boils down to that a lot of the time, Um, and I get it these days. People want, we gotta sometimes you gotta hustle. You gotta get your stuff out there. You gotta be seen and all that. I totally get that. That's normal. But I think sometimes, that's not, everyone knowing exactly your concert schedule and every moment, that doesn't really mean anything. It's just kind of a nice vanity thing to say, oh, look, I'm busy. And yes, it's good to be busy, but I think more important than demonstrating that you're, might be busy playing the flute is like, am I actually offering something of quality and sincerity to someone else? I think that is much more important than the vanity aspect of what we do. Anyway, so thank you all so much. I hope to see you again, maybe next month. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.
Is it too late to jump in with just a scheduling thing? Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Are you? Yeah. Are you doing this every month? Is that what you're?
I mean, that's what I've been doing. I've been doing one every month.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I
Yeah,
just occasionally get the
I
things
think
from
we
Flute
have the
World and
next
I
one. I
get
think the next one will probably be exactly 1 month from now.
that. Okay, cool. Well,
Yeah, so just keep on touch with the Flute World page, and you should find the info.
okay. Bye bye.
Sounds good. Bye.
Nicole, this is Cheryl. Good night.
Oh, hi, Cheryl.
Hi. Is there a way to hear this whole session? I had some teaching to do and I didn't get in late. Does Flute World post this?
I think that there is. I know it's recorded, so I'm pretty sure that you can. If you contact them, I think that they can let you do that.
Okay, I guess I'll just send it to send a note to flutes@fluteworld.com and see if they answer my question.
Yeah,
Because
should
this is part of the Flute World Collective, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they'll I think they should be able to get the right person to answer you.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you so much.
I messaged the Flute World person on here, and he says that he's going to post it on on YouTube. But then you can email. I think his name's Mark Wallace. I don't know.
Yeah, Mark Wallace. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Is
you
this
can email him, and he'll send it to you.
Is this Tyler Martin?
Yes.
No, I'm Tyler
McKinnon.
Oh, Tyler McKinnon. Okay. Well, you had some very good questions.
Oh, thank you. So Nicole has some very good answers.
Yes.
Well,
Very positive.
thanks again. Oi, Gabriel.
Bye.
Tudo bem?
Professora, tudo bem?
Tudo bom. Okay, see everybody later. Bye-bye.
Bye.